Hi, everyone. Welcome back. My name is Lananh Nguyen. I am a finance reporter at Bloomberg News in New York, and I'm really pleased to introduce our panelists this afternoon at the Aspen Ideas Reset Festival. First, we have Jamie Kalamarides. He is the president of Prudential Group Insurance, and he's joining us from Connecticut today. And we also have Karan Chopra. He is the founder of Opportunity at Work, which focuses on rewiring the U.S. labor market, who joins us from California. Hi, guys.
Hi, Lananh.
Hi.
Thanks so much for joining us on this afternoon. And I want to really kick off this conversation by, first of all, sort of defining the scope of what we're here to talk about, which is the American worker. Now, there's been a lot of news coverage around the precarity of the American worker, but I really want to lay out the problem in sort of facts and figures and how you see it from your perspective. So maybe, Jamie, you could start by talking about that.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. You know, we have seen that the pandemic has really exposed that the economic conditions of this country are disproportionately hurting those with unequal access to education and tools, primarily Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color and women. And while we'd like to think that the American dream can be reached by hard work, I think that's a common misperception. One cannot simply bootstrap their way up through this economy. We see that because 75% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. And while the connection to work and wealth is inextricable for most workers, we're finding that employers and the federal government have to step up and really take ownership for removing the barriers and rebuilding an economy that works for everybody.
And Karan, you obviously talk to many workers who don't have the kind of legacy networks, who maybe don't even have a college degree. Can you talk about the problem from your side of, or from your perspective?
Yeah, absolutely. And the pandemic has exposed us, but I want to even take us to before the pandemic, when we were supposedly in the longest stretch of economic growth that we had since from the Great Recession to say early 2020. And in 2019, at that point, you had 53 million Americans in low-wage work earning a median of $18,000 a year. So this notion, and those who've been disproportionately affected have been, to Jamie's point, people of color and individuals without a four-year college degree, who we at Opportunity at Work call STARS, those who are skilled through alternate routes. And they've seen real wage decline for the past 40 years. So their real wages have actually gone down in the last 40 years, not just stayed stagnant. And there's 70 million or more Americans in that boat who do not have a four-year college degree and who are STARS. So this is half the labor market, a large population of American workers who have seen those wages go down. And that was happening before the pandemic. So that's why this whole conversation is so apt that we're talking about a reset and not just a recovery to where we were before.
Yeah, and I want to focus a little bit more on the pandemic. So obviously it has upended our world. We're not able to do this in person. We're instead doing this virtual conference. And I wonder if you can maybe pinpoint a couple of things from your perspective that the pandemic has made more difficult, and some things that maybe, give us some hope that things will change in the future. Jamie, you want to start?
Yeah, a couple things that are more difficult. First, we saw significant unemployment right out of the gate with the pandemic and the quarantines. And it turns out that the quarantines affected people of color and women significantly worse than white men, for instance. We saw unemployment and the number of hours available drop by more than 2 times for people of color and women. And we've seen the recession and unemployment hit women substantially harder. The other thing that's really been exposed through the pandemic is the lack of paid family medical leave. That is, millions of Americans have had to choose between going to sick work or staying home and potentially losing their job, because there isn't a universal paid family leave policy in America. We're the only industrialized country in the world without it.
That's right. And Karan, how about from your perspective, what has the pandemic made more challenging or worse for people you face?
Yeah, so this the whole divide around who gets to continue to work during the pandemic versus who doesn't, right? So those who are those in low wage work are disproportionately doing work that you cannot do remotely, whether these are care jobs or these are retail jobs, food service jobs, hospitality work, and just the impact that that has had on that work, and the open question of how many of those jobs are going to come back as automation has increased, other things are sort of taking hold in the economy. I do want to say one thing that the pandemic has shed light on that I hope we can build on is this notion of essential workers. And so I think it has brought to light who actually is essential in the economy. It is the folks I mentioned. It is the folks who are producing our food, who are in the grocery stores, who are helping deliver essential goods and services to our homes so that we can live and we can get what we need, myself included, in terms of what we are doing. And so as we think about how we rebuild from here, if that is essential work and those as essential workers, the question is, what are we going to do to actually reward what is essential in the economy and those who are doing that work?
Great. Okay. And after that introduction, I think it's a really good time for us to try and bring in the audience a little bit here. So I'd like to do an audience poll. So for members of the audience, the question I want to ask is, as an employee, what are the 3 most important benefits provided by your employer? And the choices we have are health insurance, retirement plan, family and parental leave, life insurance, and disability. So, those are all very important factors, and Jamie knows many of them well, but I want to kind of distill for people what is most biggest priority. And we'll leave that for a moment, let everyone kind of get their questions or their answers in, and move on, and we'll come back to those answers in a moment. But again, talking about the precarity, Jamie, we know that the situation is dire and has maybe been made worse by the pandemic. Is there anything that the pandemic has done that can accelerate change? Has the pandemic actually concentrated minds and crystallized the need for action?
Yeah, it has. So one of the initial stimuluses from the federal government specifically created paid family leave for employees at workplaces with less than 500 workplaces with less than 500 employees. And the reason why they focused on small and medium-sized businesses is the federal government thought that large and slightly smaller businesses, more than 500 employees, could provide paid family leave. But this legislation not only mandated it, but provided a tax incentive to reimburse small businesses for this paid family leave. The challenge with it, although it was universally desired and welcome, the challenge with it is that workers didn't take it as much as we thought they might. It might have been due to lack of education or lack of awareness, but we also know that they were fearful of retribution, fearful that if they actually took advantage of this, that they might not be able to come back to their job for some reason. Now, obviously, they were protected underneath the law, but we have more to do as an economy to be able to respond to this very specific need that individuals have had.
Yeah, that's a shame to think that the benefit does exist and yet people aren't taking advantage of it. So what's the point anyway, right? And Karan, is there anything from your perspective that you see the pandemic changing and for the positive in terms of shift in thinking or new policies?
Yeah, I think there is now there is a huge spotlight around if workers get displaced, what are the ways in which both in terms of skill building, but also recognizing the skills they have to then move into another industry or an area of growth. So, for example, during the pandemic, there have been areas where jobs have increased, right? Whether that is because of digital transformation that's happening in terms of cloud, and we're doing this virtually, and that has an effect in terms of jobs created, or because of e-commerce and delivery, right? Whether it's food delivery or grocery delivery or other things that have happened. And it's brought this spotlight as to if they're declining industries and they're growing industries, what is the bridge by which workers can make that transition, and how can that transition lead to economic mobility? What I would say, though, it's just a spotlight on that issue, not necessarily, that is an area where it is ripe for now some systemic solutions for what that looks like.
Okay, great. And we have some poll results here. So it looks like 95% of respondents say health insurance is the most important, not surprising in this climate and more generally. Then 85% say retirement and 60% say family leave. So Jamie, you're the insurance guy. Tell us how that jives with what you hear.
Yeah, it's actually quite consistent with what we hear. People's first priority is health insurance. They're worried about some significant event that they don't have enough savings for, that they want to make sure that they're covered. You can't insure yourself against a traumatic experience. The next one is retirement. People are fearful of running out of money in retirement. What is surprising is that family leave is growing. In our research that we've just conducted, family leave is right up there at about 85% next to retirement in a large, well-defined sample. And that is surprising. That's really come about due to the pandemic. People are aware of this trade-off that I want to be able to, and we should define paid family leave for a second. It's being able to take care of yourself when you're sick, but it's also being able to take care of someone else when they were sick. And historically, paid leave has been focused on maternity, paternity issues. And certainly those are incredibly important. And large organizations are starting to grow in their benefits for individuals. But paid family medical leave is critical because it is so important for the worker who doesn't have emergency savings. We know that half the country does not have emergency savings to cover 3 months worth of expenses at the poverty rate. That means if they experience any sort of disruption to their job and they're living paycheck to paycheck, they're going to be destitute. They're going to not be able to recover from that for a generation because they're going to declare bankruptcy and they're going to have to put off things that help transfer wealth to the future: education, stable housing, starting a business or developing a business. And so paid family leave is the first down payment on this. And that's why it's growing in interest and benefits. What we're also seeing is the desire for more help on emergency savings. Those two things really help create the foundation. So then you can start building a pathway toward the middle class.
And Karan, what do you think about these results?
Yeah, I think I'm going to build on what Jamie said, which is these are the foundation for what you need to build to the pathway for the middle class. But then beyond that, we do need to open up what those pathways look like. So while this gives us the safety net, and we need the safety net for workers and to ensure that resiliency, we also need what I call the trampoline into the pathways to middle class, which are often blocked today. So if you look at in the recovery that happened between 2009 and 2019, 3/4 of the jobs created, the new jobs created, required a 4-year college degree. And only 60% and 60% of workers in our economy today do not have a 4-year college degree. So basically 2/3 of the workers could not even apply for or access 3/4 of the good jobs that were created in the past, and that trend continues today. So we provide, these help provide the foundational safety net, but then we need to open up what these pathways look like so that folks can progress in work, in income, and in wealth.
That's great. And Jamie, I know, one of your kind of key sort of policy recommendations here, and one of the kind of things that the private and public sector can do is support paid family leave. I know that's a huge topic you're very passionate about. Can you give us a comparison as to how other countries do this and why the US is maybe a negative case study?
Yeah, so other countries do this as a social safety net in many cases. It is a common tax, and then it is a government-sponsored program, or it's a mandate to employers to offer it. In the US, benefits are regulated at 2 levels. Some are regulated at the state level, and some are regulated at the federal level. At the federal level, they're regulated by a piece of legislation called ERISA, the Employee Retirement and Investment Security Act. And even though it sounds like it's focused on retirement, it also covers healthcare and all the other benefits. Interestingly, we have passed family medical leave, FMLA, in this country, where individuals can take unpaid leave. But the challenge with unpaid leave is it hurts your financial resiliency. It's nice that you have a job when you come back to, but you don't have income in the meantime. And so the challenge is to build on the patchwork of solutions that exist right now. There are 8 states and municipalities that require paid family leave in the country, and they've got all different sorts of benefits and rules associated with them. Very large employers offer paid family leave, and it turns out that 47% of people have access to disability insurance or paid family leave. And the stimulus, the response to the pandemic, people that worked at small business had access, but that has now expired. What we need now is a comprehensive, permanent, and sustainable approach to paid family leave. I think that is a combination of a federal and private solutions, really taking the best of both worlds, an approach that allows us to cover everyone, and you need the federal solution to be able to do that, but also uses the technology and the benefits administration expertise and the vocational and the rehabilitation experience that the private sector offers. Marry those two together and not only provide income, but help people get back to work, recognize the dignity of work in everybody, and give them the tools and the rehabilitation, the vocational help to be able to get back to work. If it's not just maternity or paternity or recovering from COVID, if it's something more serious that they've had from a disability.
And Karan, I also want to bring in your main kind of reason for being in this conversation is this idea of reskilling, or getting more workers back into this economy. It's not just about people who are taking paid family leave. It's about people who need to get better and good jobs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think there are 2 aspects to that. One is we actually need to first recognize more the skills and capabilities that workers already have. Because the way our labor market actually provides jobs is we look for pedigree proxies. So do you have a degree? Do you have a degree from an elite university? Do you have a social network where you referred to a job? Versus actual skills and capabilities that someone is demonstrating in a job. So let me give you an example. You could be a retail sales, frontline work, that's $14 an hour. Customer service representative is about $16 an hour, and a sales job is about $26 an hour. Largely the same skill sets: active listening, persuasion, customer perception, customer service orientation. But when you're hiring for folks in sales roles, which are middle-class jobs, very rarely do people who are in the frontline retail, whether it's hourly or annual, $14 an hour job, get a shot at that job. So I'm demonstrating those skills in my work today. But the way we actually look at resumes, the way our applicant tracking system, where you submit your resume and screens, or how recruiting does not, or even mobility within companies. I'm in the same company. Can I move up the ladder? And how do I move up the ladder? It's not actually based on skills and capabilities. So that's the first part. And then the second part is you say, okay, even with that, there's some skills, capabilities you have, and there's a gap here, but how do we start bridging that? And what I would say is this conversation is directly tied to the equity conversation, because the vast majority of people of color are in frontline, low-wage work, and they're overrepresented there, and they're underrepresented in higher wage work. So there's a study that just came out that basically showed that 19% of Black workers are in frontline low wage work. And then when you think about moving up the ladder within a large company at the middle management level, that representation is only 5 to 7%. So this whole conversation about reskilling and upskilling and what mobility looks like is inherently tied to the equity conversation, particularly for people of color and for women.
That's great. And just wanting to bring the audience in again here, just everyone in the audience, we've gone through some really key and important topics. So if you have questions for us, we're going to have a very substantial comment and question answer period at the end of this conversation. So we'll have 15 minutes of questions. Our panelists are very generously wanting to interact with you directly. So please feel free to send us your questions in the chat. And Jamie, you wanted to ask Karan a question earlier about work. So maybe you could post that question and make my job a little easier.
Yeah. So first, I'm happy to. I also want to respond to what Karan was just saying about the need for large employers. Prudential has, as a large employer, has recognized exactly what Karan has talked about, and that is we have published 9 commitments to racial equity, and 5 of them are about dealing with our own employees. And at the heart of it is focusing on skills rather than pedigree, capabilities and experience rather than social network. We have inventoried all of the skills of all of our workers, everybody. And now we proactively approach people with the skills for job openings, so that they don't have to even wait. We go to them. And we've been upskilling workers on the specific skills that we need in the future. So, Karan, I guess my question is what's the relationship that you see between having financial resiliency and work? What are workers looking for from their employers about financial resiliency, not just skills?
Yeah, well, first of all, it's terrific to hear what you're doing, Jamie, on the Prudential side, because that's what I think really all companies need to do for themselves, and there's a huge business case for them, but also for workers and for the economy.
Agreed.
Especially as with the changing nature of work, because of automation, because of technology, because of other things happening, jobs are changing, and we need the kind of that whole dynamism that Prudential you're doing within a company, and we need it economy wide. On your question, there are 2 things. One is, without the financial resiliency, those benefits that we were talking about earlier, and Jamie, some of the proposals you're mentioning, workers don't have the safety net to actually think about, okay, how do I go take a class? How do I spend the time doing it? And so what they're looking for from employers is, give me the safety net, but also give me the time and the space. It's one thing to say, I'm going to offer an education benefit so you can go work on your degree or work on something. But if I'm working unpredictable shifts, I'm working long hours, I have to take care of a family at home, where is the time, in addition to the financial resiliency, that allows me to actually upskill and allows me to take a chance at getting another job? And without knowing that I have a safety net, I can't take that risk. Why should I go study for something when I don't know if I can get the job at the other end, or I don't have the time or the financial resources to be able to do it? The other thing I'd say is, it's beyond the extrinsic. There's also the people at work are looking for a sense of community. They're looking for meaning. They're looking for being this notion of being recognized. Things that I think we all value outside of just the tangible, sort of financial benefits. And how do we see that for all workers? Because all work is valuable for us, for our economy. And how do we recognize that in every single individual that is contributing to our economy and to our society, to our companies, to each other?
Love that. I just thinking to your metaphor of a trampoline, more people will get on the trampoline if there's a safety net. None of us would drive over a bridge without guardrails. Yeah. We need both the bridge and the guardrails. We need the trampoline and the safety net to move forward.
Well put. And so I'm going to play devil's advocate as the reporter in the room. And I want to talk to both of you about this idea that benefits, perks, and a safety net are not the job of the private sector. What do you say when people say, look, all of these things are perks? At the end of the day, we're a business, we have a business to run, and this is a nice to have, but it's not, essential. Jamie, you start.
Yeah, there is a clear moral case. We've already articulated it. What's becoming more apparent is that there is a business case around financial resiliency. We know that workers who have financial resiliency are more engaged at work. They're more loyal. They are not distracted by the challenges that financial stress causes. We know that workers that have access to disability and paid family leave have more presenteeism. They're on the job more because they actually take work off when they need to deal with the situation, they can resolve it and come back to work because they have comfort with that. We know that there's a business case around paid family and medical leave because of the pandemic. Workplaces that did not have paid family medical leave or discouraged people from taking it had COVID outbreaks and ended up having a worse situation if that person had stayed home as a primary caregiver or taken care of themselves. There is a clear and present and obvious business case for CFOs to focus on the financial resiliency of their workers. They have a more productive, more engaged, more resilient workforce that allows them to compete more effectively at a lower total cost.
Got it. And Karan, what about you? What do you say when people say these are nice to haves?
Yeah, I'll add two things to what Jamie said in terms of the clear business case for employers, which is one, there is a clear case. There are studies that show this now on an upskilling standpoint for your in-demand jobs. Because if you take the total cost of that job going unfilled, or the talent pool and the hiring costs of that and the onboarding costs of bringing in someone new to fill that job versus upskilling someone in your organization, there's a clear ROI. And that person in your organization, you already know some characteristics about them. You already know that they're high performing in another job. You know they're showing up on time. You know they're doing a good job. They know the company. They know the culture. And there are, in many cases, a clear ROI case around that. There's also a clear case around if you hire based on skills and capabilities, you will, have a more diverse workforce because you're removing things like the degree requirement, which are exclusionary and disproportionately affect people of color. But also, there are now organizations that are helping companies do this. And from that, they're seeing real retention benefit. They're seeing ROI, particularly in healthcare and in retail and in hospitality industries, where there's a retention ROI that more than makes up for anything else in terms of employee engagement and well-being.
Okay, great. And so now I want to do our second survey question before we kick off into Q&A. And audience members, I want to ask you what you think is the biggest threat to the U.S. labor market. Is it overseas competition, lack of a safety net, automation, sluggish growth, or low wages? Now, it could be, many of those things in concert, but I'm keen to hear your results on this. And then, guys, maybe you could give me, maybe you could weigh in on this as well. What do you think is the biggest threat to the labor market? Jamie?
Yeah, I do think it is the combination that we've been talking about. It's the safety net and the trampoline. It's individuals having confidence to be and the financial resiliency to get on the trampoline. And that's those two things in combination are the critical and necessary steps for resolving our economy and really making it an equitable environment.
Karan, how about you?
I might even take it one level up and say, actually, it's the paradigm that we are in. So I think we've spent a lot of time engineering things to deliver return on invested capital without spending a lot of time thinking about our human capital, thinking about work and workers, and how do we design policies in our economy to actually optimize for that. And I'll give you a couple of examples which are more around even mindset. So we think that low wage work is low value, is low skill, when it's not true. We refer to people without a 4-year degree, sub-baccalaureate, more about what they don't have versus they're skilled in different ways. So I would actually say there's an overarching paradigm on how we think about work, how we think about workers, and what kind of economy we want to have, which is now having this whole stakeholder capitalism debate that is happening. And I think that provides the foundation of what are the values that we want to live up to, and then let's drive specific policy and practices from there.
Great, and we're still waiting for some survey results, but I want to just close off this moderated session between you guys before we get the audience in and ask you why. You may not be familiar to the people who are watching right now, so I want to ask, first of all, Jamie, why? Why is this such a big deal for you?
Yeah, this is important to me because of my faith, and my faith has a strong social justice element. It starts with recognizing the individual human dignity of every person and creating an equitable environment. I have the privilege and the blessings to work at an institution that recognizes that the stakeholder capitalism element that Karan was talking about, how do you do both good and do well at the same time? Those two things don't have to be at odds. We can make a difference intentionally in our society, in our communities, for our workers, for our clients, for those that are underprivileged, by bringing the full strength and capabilities that we have as an organization and improve people's financial wellness. And that's really a great privilege that I can focus on that, both in the private sector and on policy issues.
So Jamie's faith drives him. How about you, Karan? What in your background drives you to do the work you're doing?
Yeah, my life experience. So I was born in India. I grew up in West Africa, in Ghana, and I was able to come as an immigrant to the United States to pursue education and to pursue work, would then fundamentally change the trajectory of my life and my family's life and the opportunities I've had. And there were many people I grew up with who worked harder, who were smarter than me, but didn't have the same sets of things fall into place. So this whole notion of you'll get ahead if you just work harder, or you just need to build your skills, and that's what's gonna drive security for you and your family and meaning. It's just not true. To Jamie's intro to this session, and I've seen that firsthand in my life and ways in which I've been fortunate around that, and so that drives me to how do we extend that to millions of people who don't have it today.
That's great. It's good for our listeners to get to know you guys a little bit too and understand where you're coming from. So just on our survey, I want to just recap the results. So the biggest threat to the U.S. labor market is, according to our respondents, 38% say low wages, 29% say the lack of a safety net. So you clearly have been persuasive during this session. 17% say automation, and 11% say overseas competition, and 4% say sluggish growth. So a lot to mull over as we head into the Q&A. So are you ready for some audience questions?
It's great. Yeah.
All right. First question. Is now the time to relook at universal basic income? I think a lot of people are looking at it right now. So Karan, what are your thoughts?
So at a high level, yes, this concept of how do we have a floor and how do we raise the floor for everyone, in particular with disruption of work, automation, changing nature of jobs coming up. It is something to look at, but it's an and, not a silver bullet solution. By that, I mean, work is more than income. As I said earlier, I think there's a sense of meaning, there's a sense of community, there is learning, there is growth. So while universal basic income, in my opinion, can provide some of that floor and some of that safety we are looking at, we also need to figure out for people, how are they going to generate meaning? How are they going to have dignity in work that they do, and not assume that we're just going to have this wonderful world of a jobless future, but UBI will take care of it. So to me, this is an and conversation, not a silver bullet solution or an or.
Jamie, what about your thoughts on UBI?
I think Karan has summed it up very well. And the other challenge with universal basic income, it's an and, is because any amount of income doesn't insure against unexpected risks, injury, disability, traumatic health, some other things that you need to be able to protect your assets. Individuals need an opportunity for financial resilience and build assets and savings so they can manage through the ups and downs and actually create transferable wealth to the next generation as well.
Great. Okay. And our audience is very engaged today. So we've got another question from the audience. How can we get banks and businesses to work with community colleges to set up internships and impact local communities? Karan, why don't you start on this one?
Yeah, there are a number of examples of this happening at the local levels where you have, I think the first question is, where are there groups of employers who are coming together? Because the beauty in something like this is if it is actually done collectively, not individually. So my my call to action for companies is, yes, you can design programs for yourself. What is more meaningful for your communities is actually to influence your peers to say, okay, here's a set of jobs that we want to open up. We want to open up these pathways, and it's training, whether it's from community colleges or other alternate routes for individuals. That is not just for you, but actually that is building a local economy that you are in, is one. There's a second one, which I would say, there's a policy in the UK which is interesting around apprenticeships. So they have an apprenticeship levy where large companies pay 0.5% into an apprenticeship levy that then subsidizes the wage and the apprenticeship cost for small businesses in the economy, which has actually worked quite well over the last 2 or 3 years, and actually gets to how do we fund these pathways, and how do we get good jobs, and how can small businesses, who are the largest job creators in the country, participate and afford in that. And so what's the role that large companies and the public sector play in that? It's a pretty interesting example to think about as we think about policies here.
And Jamie, Prudential obviously is a large company, and you do a lot of community work in your local areas. Can you talk a little bit about how you as a company can encourage more participation from people in the community, and get more people better jobs?
Yeah, so we invest directly in our communities. We have a substantial foundation where we've invested billions of dollars into not only direct giving, but also into locally owned organizations that have a multiplier effect. And it's so important. We've been talking about benefits and upskilling, but access to capital is a critical element as well. And we've been doing that both through our investing and direct giving. But there's another thing that we do that is absolutely critical, and that is we intentionally build into our solutions capabilities that help people of color, women, small businesses, individuals that don't have the access or the equity, because we know that if we can actually focus on solving the issues there on the ground, then that's part of the foundation, that's part of the safety net beyond benefits, but it's sort of the personal safety net that is so important for individuals. And it does start with jobs. And so we've talked about this. It is critical to us to be able to have an environment where everybody has an equitable opportunity to apply for jobs. One of the things we've done recently, and the pandemic is a positive element to it, we've realized that any job can happen anywhere. We've all lived it in the financial services environment. Essential workers have shown us that jobs are critical on the ground, but for financial services, you can do any job anywhere. And because of that, we've removed barriers for people having to be where the job was located. That's opening up opportunities for spouses of military. That's opening up opportunities for people who don't have the wealth or the network to be able to move to a major metropolitan area, but still have the skills to be able to get it done. And we're really excited about that.
Okay, guys.
In terms of less than 1 in 10, so less than 10% of Black workers are in the fastest growing counties and cities from a job growth standpoint. So what Jamie is saying, being able to actually open up good jobs that can be anywhere opens those jobs up to the equity conversation as well. That's not the only solution. And then we have to talk about the digital divide and other things and all of that. But as I said, less than 10% of Black workers were actually located in some of the fastest growing counties and cities. So this whole geography of jobs question is a really important one.
Yeah, no, and it's I think the jury's still out. It could democratize things, but it could also concentrate inequality as well. And we're not, we haven't landed yet. So.
We have not landed. It's early days.
Okay, guys, we have so many more questions, so I'm going to rush you. Well, let's do a lightning round. Next question: what's the best way to pass a national paid family and medical leave policy? Jamie, that's for you.
Yeah, we have to have a bipartisan solution. The Family Act from the Democrats and tax incentives from the Republicans are not enough yet. We've got to be able to find a bipartisan solution. I have hope in that because we recently found a bipartisan solution on the retirement side. It's called the Secure Act. It allows small businesses to pool their purchasing power We passed it for retirement. Let's do the exact same thing for disability and paid family leave to create a public-private partnership and have an equitable system that everyone can access.
Okay, next question, Karan. As more people move to gig work, which is often multiple gigs at a time, who's going to advocate for these workers to ensure their financial wellness?
It's a great question. I don't have the answer, but there are two thoughts. One is there are examples of this, of guilds that form. So this is, what does collective action and what does worker voice and agency look like in a gig world? And there are historical examples of guilds that then advocate for that from a gig worker standpoint. The second thing I would say is, just as now the conversation is hot around portable benefits in terms of healthcare and other portable benefits for workers, I think we need to think about the same thing for education benefits and career mobility. So can workers, for example, have a learner account that employers contribute their fraction to and that stays with them over the course? That's just one idea. There are many others, and the Aspen Institute has actually put out some stuff around this. But I think we need to think about benefits that are also around career mobility and learning and training.
And I think, Jamie, you've got thoughts on gig work too, right?
Two quick add-ons. First, the Aspen Institute has created a framework around portable benefits, and they've specifically thought through what's necessary for the gig economy. And then second, just to make what Karan was saying real about guilds, there are associations that are specifically serving gig workers and gig worker verticals. The American Nurses Association, the CPAs. Now, these are all professional associations, but we're seeing more and more workers banding together to create environments to offer benefits to themselves. And that's really exciting. It's there. It's not the solution. It's a solution.
Great. Okay, next question, probably for Karan. First of all, many employers admit that a college degree is not necessary, but there are too many qualified applicants and they use it as a screening device. How do you counter that?
First of all, the person who wrote the question is exactly right. Many employers know that it's not the answer, but they still use it. What I would say to them is that the technology to be able to assess skills and capabilities or infer it has moved on leaps and bounds in the last 10 years. There are solutions out there. Opportunity at Work has a marketplace. There are many other players. Workday, one of the large companies that drives HR tech solutions, has a skills cloud product. There are many, many solutions out there that get to how to assess skills and capabilities. By the way, this happens in software development all the time. People look at their code and your coding portfolio, not necessarily your degree or where you went to college. So there are very specific technology-based solutions out there that make this easy for an employer to do today.
Okay, great. And one last question. Let's go to both of you. What are your thoughts on the astronomical rising costs of college, and is that a barrier to entry? Jamie, why don't you start?
Yeah, it can be. But I think that as we've just been talking about, employers like Prudential are starting to hire based on skills, not based on credentials. And for some paths, college can be a worthwhile approach. The challenge is that rising student debt is not only handcuffing the students, it's handcuffing their parents and their families as well. The highest group of rising student debt that we see are 50 to 60-year-olds who are co-signing for their children. And so there's a challenge and there's an opportunity. How do you focus on skills-based learning? How do you leverage community college to springboard you to get 2 years at a less expensive price and then move on to a 4-year degree? How do we start building trade opportunities? Those are all critical.
Yeah, I'd add two thoughts to that. One is we need more work and learn models together rather than, you're 18, you're going to go to college for 4 years, 5 years, 6 years. I mean, the average person doesn't graduate in 4 years anymore anyway. And so what are these work and learn models that then can be lifelong? for workers. And so this whole barrier between college and work, I mean, that needs to blend moving forward together, and also allows you to earn while you learn. The second thing is, there's a high cost, but what's the ROI? Are you going to guarantee a job at the end? Some of the saddest part around the student debt is not then getting the outcomes from an income and a wage and a career growth standpoint after you've spent the money on college. So how do we actually make education financing more outcomes based and in pay for success models, rather than, you pay tuition and then it's a 50-50 chance, if that, on whether you will graduate, and then after that, whether you'll get a good job.
Great. Well, guys, we had so many more questions than we were able to answer during that Q&A. So thank you to our audience members for being so engaged in this. All I've got to do now is wrap up and say thank you to Jamie, who's the president of Prudential Group Insurance, and Karan Chopra, who is the co-founder of Opportunity at Work. Thank you so much for such a great conversation on the future of work.
Thank you, Lananh.